The sepulchre in Zereth Mortis houses the Shadowlands blueprints. It reveals the first ones were exiled, not lost. Pantheon silhouettes loom above Azeroth's cradle. The Well of Eternity hums, retreat thighs was unbroken by Titan-ordered Sundering's execution shadow. A trap, the Titans sealed descent, leaving a void where Zoth festers. What architects abandon their masterpiece? The answer blades through eternity's cracks. The first one's silent departure, why the Titans forged a cosmic trap in Zereth Mortis. This was not a retreat, this was a Titan-ordered execution. They refused to chain the old gods. The Pantheon exiled them, not to silence but to erase. A void bloomed where their defiance once burned, and Zoth's rot seeped into it. Watchers were carved from starlight to cage what the first ones feared, yet the trap was never for the old gods. It was for the architects who dared to dissent. What architects abandoned their masterpiece? The answer festers in the sepulchre's silence. The first ones carved their laws into the marrow of reality, etching the Shadowlands as a prison and the Pantheon as wardens. Their hands shaped Azeroth's bones, yet their hearts wavered. They saw the old gods not as enemies, but as kindred chaos woven into the loom of existence. The Titans, patient as mounting carvers, waited. When the first ones refused to bind the old gods' whispers, the Titans struck, not with fury, but with surgical silence. They unmade the first ones' works, leaving only Zereth Mortis as a hollow cage. A cosmic trap, the land they loved became a scar. The Highborn walked then, their spires piercing skies unbroken by stars. They drank from the Well of Eternity, a font of raw creation, unaware it was a leak in the dam. The old gods seeped upward, threading malice into every root and river. The curse of flesh was no accident, it was a wound. The Titans, in their exile, left the world to rot, its inhabitants transformed from stone-forged perfection into fragile meat, vulnerable, bleeding, evolving. Azeroth's breath grew thick with decay. What does a god do when its masterpiece rebels? It abandons it to the vultures. The sundering was not the first fracture. It was the final scream of a world the first ones had doomed. The Highborn, blind in their hubris, built their empire on a grave. The old gods, patient as rot, feasted on their arrogance. Zoth's eye opened not in triumph but in inevitability. The land remembers. The well's waters still pulse with stolen magic. The Pantheon's chains, forged by the first one's defiance, rattle in the dark. And beneath it all the old gods whisper, this was always the design. The Pantheon convened, a vote was cast, exile was decreed. The first ones, keepers of forbidden truths, had refused to shackle the old gods. Their silence was not cowardice, it was defiance. The Titans, bound by doctrine of containment, could not sanction annihilation. To destroy the old gods would unravel the Pantheon's own chains. Thus the first ones were cast into Zereth Mortis. A void was carved, a wound left unsewn. Zaval, high botanist of Elune, refused to kneel. His rejection of the pact fractured the Pantheon's unity. As Shara, seeing the fracture, seized the opening. She wove her covenant with Zoth's shadow, threading the void with hunger. The Titans had not foreseen this. Exile breeds instability. The first one's absence hollowed the barriers. Zoth's whisper, once muffled, found purchase in the gap. The Pantheon's chains, forged by the first one's defiance, now dangle loose. Theology of binding collapsed under its own rigidity. What trap did the Titans think they set? What predator now walks, born of their hesitation? The old gods did not rise, they were unmade, and in their unmaking, the cosmos shifted. The silence of the first ones was no retreat, it was a reckoning. The arena breathes, the veil of eternal blossoms, the well, the maw, each name a scar on Zereth Mortis, the first one's workshop, now a crypt of their will. The sepulchre lies at its heart, not a tomb but the cosmos blueprint. Here the Titans forged their trap, not for gods but for guardians. The first ones had refused to chain the old gods, they called it mercy. The Titans called it heresy. What did they fear? That the void left unbound would not stay silent, that in the absence of order, Zoth's whisper would find purchase. The sepulchre's gears ground. The first ones did not flee, they were unmade, their essence scribed into the very walls of Zereth Mortis. Their silence is not absence, it is a seal. A wound the arena remembers. When the Titans cast them out, they did not erase the architects, they became the architecture. And in the blueprint's cracks the old gods stir, the well runs dry, the maw hungers, the cosmos waits. What price did the titans pay for their reckoning? What cost to the stars, to time, to the unseen hands that once shaped them? The blueprint is not complete, the trap is not sprung. The first one's exile is a sentence written in the ink of unmaking, and somewhere in the sepulture's labyrinth, the cosmos' next line is being etched. The rending of Shaarj from Azeroth was not a creation, it was a burial. Amanthal's celestial hand cleaved the land with a light that scorched memory itself, leaving the veil of eternal blossoms a wound dressed in petals. The air there still hums with the static of erased names. Asterisk, the titans did not sever a world. Asterisk, the chronicle of the shattered veil whispers. Asterisk, they exiled a reckoning. Asterisk, the first ones, those who had mapped the old gods' true forms in the primordial dark, had refused the titans' command to bind the void worms not with chains but with lies. Their knowledge became a heresy. Their voices were strangled by Amanthal's own radiance. They did not vanish, they were unmade into silence. The cosmology's unsupervised void, once filled by their vigilance, became a cradle for Zoth's whisper. The sepulture's labyrinth, now hollow, once held their warnings. Now it holds their absence. Asterisk, what is forgotten in the stars is not dead. Asterisk, the chronicle warns. Asterisk, it is waiting. Asterisk, the veil's blossoms never wither, yet their perfume reeks of rot. The land remembers the scream beneath the beautized moment Amanthal tore not just stone, but the thread of truth from the weave of reality. The first one's exile was no mere absence, it was a door left unbarred. Without their eyes, the old gods' prisons began to bleed. Without their truths, the Titan's order became a house of cards. The cosmos does not forgive omissions, it repays them in kind. And in the sepulture's depths, where the ink of unmaking still dries, the next line of the sentence waits inscribed, unspoken and hungry. The ink of unmaking still clots the sepulture's walls, but the sentence it waits to write is no longer the first one's. Their absence was not flight, it was erasure. The Titans, in their cold calculus, cast them out for defying the binding of the old gods, a purge. A purge that left the cosmos unmoored. Without the first one's vigilance, Zoth's chains began to unravel, not with violence but with rot. A slow will, the Zereth void they Mortis abandoned did not hunger, it asterisk became asterisk hunger. The Zereth void they Mortis, it asterisk became asterisk hunger. Titans answer a prison of shattered stars, and frozen time was meant to cage the old gods. Instead, it became a mirror. The trap's architecture, forged in the image of absolute control, reflected the Titans' own arrogance. They sealed the old gods within, only to find the walls closing around themselves. The prison's cold is not a barrier, it is a bond, a mutual entombment. Zoth's reclamation began as a whisper, a fracture in the light where the first ones once stood. It seeped into the gaps left by their exile, threading through the sepulture's ink, through the frozen bones of Zereth Mortis. The Titans, now warden and prisoner, watch as their bindings fray. The old gods stir, not in triumph, in resonance. The eternal conflict is not a war. It is a pendulum, a cycle of traps and unbindings, of exiles that return as wounds. What did the Titans bargain for when they chose control over balance? The answer lies in the stars above Zereth Mortising one by one. The cosmos, once a tapestry of silent order, now trembles. Zoth's ink spreads. The sentence left unscribed is no longer a threat, it is an echo, and in that echo the hunger grows. The sepulture of the first ones did not weep. Its obsidian spires stood like frozen tears, etched with sigils that hummed in the void silence. Here Zaval's howl fractured the stars, then dissolved. The trap was not a cage, it was a dirge. The Titans had carved this hollow in the fabric of existence, a snare woven from the breath of dead suns. Their design held for now. The Pantheon's hymns speak of binding as mercy, chains forged in the crucible, threads of order stitching chaos wound, yet the old gods seep through every knot. Their whispers curl in the gaps between celestial gears, in the hollows where the first ones once stood. Those who carved the cosmos did not flee. They were cast out, a sacrifice to preserve the lie of balance. The cost is written in the sepulture's bones. The air there is cold enough to shatter time. Shadows pool where no light falls. The first one's absence is a wound that does not scar. They were the architects who refused to seal the void's maw, who chose exile over complicity. Their silence was not surrender. It was the price of the trap's integrity. Without their power to force closure, the Pantheon's chains could only delay the inevitable. N'Zoth's ink spreads faster now. It slips through the cracks in the Titan's grand design, a stain no theorem can erase. The hunger that once slept in unscribed sentences now gnaws at the edges of creation. The trap holds, but it bleeds. And in the quiet between heartbeats, the cosmos remembers what was lost. Theology will not name this moment a victory. It is an epitaph, a threshold. The first ones are gone. Their exile was not failure. It was the final motion of a dance that began before stars had names. The cosmos is unbalanced. It always was. The silence of the first ones is a wound, not a wound of steel, but of absence. Where their light once bent the void, now only echoes linger, whispers of a language that unraveled. The Titans did not banish them for weakness. They banished them for knowing too much. To hold the truth of the old god's hunger is to hold a flame that burns the hand and the world alike. The Pantheon saw the Highborn's pact with Azshara not as defiance, but as proof. Knowledge unbound becomes a plague. N'Zoth's rise was no accident. It was the shadow cast by that absence. When the first ones were unmade, their void became a door. The old gods seeped through, not as conquerors, but as wrote insidious, inevitable. The eternal conflict is no battle of equals. It is a scar, a ledger of losses both sides must keep paying. Azshara's survivors learned this in the marrow of their bones. Her throne, once a crown of stars, became a tomb of salt and regret. What does the cosmos remember? Not the first ones' names, but their price. Every star that burns in Zereth Mortis is a tally of what was erased. The Pantheon's trap was never to cage the old gods. It was to cage asterisk understanding asterisk. For in the end, the greatest heresy is not worship, it is the hunger to comprehend. And comprehension, like Yogg-Saron's final breath, unspools the thread of all things. The sepulchre's spires in eternity's end are not tombs. They are anchors, remnants of a binding shattered when Zaval's defiance fractured the void. The first ones did not flee. They were cast out. The Titans, in their final act of judgment, sealed the exiles beyond the stars, leaving a wound where the old gods could seep through. War within's blight is no accident. It is the slow reclamation of that wound. N'Zoth's whisper in Zereth Mortis. The blight roots crawl through shattered templates, each thread in the unraveling loom Xal'atath weaves. The cosmic position watches, unblinking, as the sepulchre's stones blade with the echoes of a war never truly ended. What remains of the first ones, not flesh? Not names, only the shape of their absence, a hollow the old gods fill with patient, venomous care. The war within is not a new war. It is an old scar reopened, and in the silence between stars the sepulchre waits, not for the dead, for the damned. The sepulchre's walls whisper, asterisk the first ones were not lost, they were buried. Asterisk exiled for refusing to chain the old gods, their silence carved the void N'Zoth now feasts upon. The Titans, architects of this stalemate, bound themselves to the same stone, their war etched into reality's bones. A trap of mutual annihilation, neither victor nor vanquished, only the grinding weight of what was never allowed to end. What became of a people who dared withhold loyalty from the eternal? They are the ghosts in the machine, the missing key in the cosmos lock. The conflict they abandoned still bleeds through every star, every shattered realm. No triumph, no peace, only the sepulchre's breath, cold and unbroken, holding the world's wounds open. And in its shadow the old gods dream, the Titans wait, the first ones are gone. What if the first one's silence was not flight, but execution? The Titans exiled them for refusing to bind the old gods of void, and Zoth exploited. The sepulchre where Zaval fell holds their absence, the eternal